I'm Eleanor, 32 years old, and I never expected to find myself fighting for my grandmother Evelyn's legacy. After years of estrangement from my family, her death brought me back to face the parents who'd always disapproved of my choices and the brother who could do no wrong. When they tried to erase me from her will, they thought I'd accept defeat and disappear again. They never counted on me discovering what was hidden beneath the surface, literally and figuratively. If you're watching this story of betrayal and justice, drop a comment, letting me know where you're watching from, hit the like button, and subscribe to see how sometimes you have to write your own ending when others try to erase you from the story. My grandmother Evelyn Ward was extraordinary in every sense of the word. While most people in our small Connecticut town knew her as the elegant widow who hosted the annual charity gala, I knew her as the woman who taught me to see beauty in broken things. Her estate Willowbrook was a sprawling Victorian mansion surrounded by gardens that seemed magical to me as a child. But it was her private art collection that truly set her apart. Dozens of masterpieces acquired over decades, including works by several Impressionist painters she particularly adored. "Art isn't just about what you see, Eleanor," she would tell me as we wandered through her gallery. "It's about what you feel when you see it." In contrast to grandmother's artistic soul, my parents were pragmatists to their core. My father, Frank, was the managing partner at Ward & Associates, the law firm founded by my great-grandfather. My mother, Gloria, served on the boards of various charities, but approached philanthropy like a business transaction, calculating the precise social capital gained from each donation. From an early age, it was clear I didn't fit their mold. While they valued order and tradition, I was drawn to creativity and expression. My brother Richard, 2 years older, was the perfect son, student body, president, law school valedictorian, and now a rising star at the family firm. I was the disappointment, the one who turned down law school to pursue art conservation. "Art conservation," my mother had said when I announced my career choice, pronouncing the words as if they tasted bitter. "And how exactly will you support yourself with that?" "It's hardly a practical choice, Eleanor," my father added. "The Ward name has been synonymous with law for generations." Only grandmother Evelyn had championed my decision. "The Wards were artists long before they were lawyers," she told me privately. "Your great-great-grandmother was a renowned painter. They've conveniently forgotten that part of our history." Summer months at Willowbrook were my sanctuary growing up. While my parents traveled through Europe and Richard attended prestigious internships, I stayed with grandmother, helping her catalog her collection and learning about art history. We would spend hours in her studio at the top of the house where she still painted occasionally, despite her arthritis. "You have the eye, Eleanor," she would say, as I helped her identify which paintings needed restoration. "You see beyond the surface. That's a rare gift." The rift with my family became unbridgeable when I was 19. During a summer internship at my father's firm, a concession I'd made to please my parents, I discovered documents indicating that Dad had helped a corporate client cover up a toxic waste dump that had contaminated groundwater in a low-income neighborhood. When I confronted him, he dismissed it as the cost of doing business. "This is why I never wanted you in the firm," he said coldly. "You're too emotional, too idealistic. The real world requires compromise." "There's a difference between compromise and complicity," I responded. The argument escalated until I threatened to take the documents to the state environmental agency. The next morning, I found the files mysteriously lost, and by afternoon, I was on a bus back to college with my father's words ringing in my ears. "You've chosen your path, Eleanor. Don't expect it to lead back here." I finished my degree and went on to graduate school for art conservation. The family paid my tuition. Appearances mattered too much to cut me off entirely, but our relationship dwindled to obligatory holiday calls and the occasional strained dinner when I visited Connecticut. Only grandmother maintained a real connection with me, though. Even those visits became less frequent as my parents increasingly controlled access to her. We wrote letters instead. Beautiful old-fashioned letters on her personalized stationery that became my lifeline to family. She sent news about Willowbrook, about the new paintings she acquired, and about the local gossip she knew would make me laugh. I wrote about my studies, my small apartment in Boston, and the satisfaction I found in restoring damaged artworks to their former glory. Our last conversation occurred 3 weeks before her death. I'd called to tell her about a job offer from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and she'd been thrilled. "You're carrying on the true Ward legacy," she said, her voice weaker than I remembered, but still warm. "Remember, Eleanor, the truth is always in the brushstrokes. Artists can't hide their intentions, not from someone who knows how to look." At the time, I thought she was just being philosophical. Later, I would understand it was a clue. The call about her death came on a Tuesday morning. Heart failure, supposedly unexpected, despite her 82 years. What struck me as odd was that it wasn't my parents who called, but Martha, her housekeeper of 30 years. "She asked me to contact you directly if anything happened," Martha explained, her voice breaking slightly. "The funeral is Saturday. Your parents are handling the arrangements." The fact that grandmother had made contingency plans to ensure I was notified sent a chill through me. What had she feared might happen? 3 days later, I drove through the wrought iron gates of Willowbrook for the first time in nearly 2 years, wondering what other surprises my grandmother had left behind. The driveway to Willowbrook curved through maple trees that had just begun to turn golden in the early October air. As I approached the house, memories flooded back, hiding in the garden gazebo, with a book helping grandmother plant tulip bulbs along the stone pathway, watching fireflies from the wide porch on summer evenings. This place had always felt more like home than anywhere else. The house itself stood exactly as I remembered, 3 stories of Victorian grandeur, with a tower room where grandmother kept her studio. Cars lined the circular drive, expensive sedans and SUVs belonging to family members and local dignitaries. I parked my modest Honda behind a Mercedes I recognized as Uncle Warren's, my father's younger brother, who had escaped the family business to become a history professor. I'd barely stepped from my car when Richard appeared on the front steps. At 34, he looked more like our father than ever, tall and lean, with perfectly coiffed dark hair and the practiced smile of someone accustomed to charming juries. "Eleanor, you made it." His tone suggested he'd half expected me not to show. "Mother and father are in the parlor with the funeral director." No hug. No, "I'm sorry for our shared loss." Just procedural information, delivered with professional courtesy. "Hello to you too, Richard," I replied, retrieving my small suitcase. "I'll be staying until after the will reading." A flicker of something annoyance concern crossed his face. "Of course. Your old room is available. Martha made it up for you." The entrance hall was filled with flower arrangements and subdued conversations. Several distant relatives nodded politely as I passed, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and judgment. "The prodigal granddaughter returns," they seemed to say. In the formal parlor, my parents stood near the fireplace, heads bent in conversation, with a solemn man in a dark suit. My mother spotted me first, her posture straightening as if preparing for battle. "Eleanor, you're here," and the same greeting as Richard, with the same undertone of surprise. She air-kissed my cheek, careful not to smudge her perfect makeup. At 60, Gloria Ward remained striking, silver-streaked dark hair, aristocratic features, and a perpetual expression of mild disapproval. My father turned, extending his hand as if greeting a business associate. "Eleanor, thank you for coming. We've selected a closed casket ceremony. The viewing is family only tomorrow evening, funeral Saturday at 11. No, how are you?" No acknowledgement of the 10-hour drive I'd just completed. Just logistics, as if grandmother's death were a business transaction to be efficiently managed. "Where is she?" I asked simply. "The funeral home has already taken her," Mother replied. "Everything is arranged." I nodded, swallowing my frustration. "And her belongings, her personal effects?" "We're cataloging everything," Richard said, appearing beside me. "For probate purposes." "I'd like to see her studio," I said. My parents exchanged a glance. "The studio has been cleaned out," Father said. "Most of her art supplies were quite old. We've donated them to the local community college." The speed with which they'd disposed of grandmother's most personal space sent warning bells ringing in my mind. And her collection, the paintings. "We're having them appraised," Mother said smoothly. "Several will be donated to museums, as she would have wanted." Before I could respond, a warm voice interrupted from the doorway. "Eleanor, my God, look at you." Michael Reynolds stood there, his familiar smile a sudden bright spot in the somber room. We'd grown up together, our grandmothers being close friends, though we'd lost touch after high school, when he'd gone to Columbia and I to Rhode Island School of Design. He'd filled out since then, his lanky teenage frame replaced by broad shoulders, though his curly brown hair remained charmingly untamed. "Michael." I moved toward him, grateful for a friendly face. "What are you doing here?" "I'm handling some of the estate matters," he explained, giving me a brief but warm hug. "I joined Stevenson and Clark last year. Your grandmother was one of my first clients." I blinked in surprise. "I thought Thomas Blackwell was grandmother's attorney. He's handled the family's legal affairs for decades." Another meaningful glance between my parents. "Thomas retired," Father said dismissively. "Michael has been very helpful during this difficult time." Michael's eyes met mine with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We should catch up later," he said. "I've got some paperwork to review with your parents now, but perhaps dinner." "I'd like that," I replied, noticing my mother's subtle frown of disapproval. I excused myself to settle into my old room, which felt like a time capsule of my teenage years. Same lavender walls, same antique desk where I'd written college applications, same view of the garden where grandmother and I had spent countless hours. Only the fresh linens suggested anyone had entered in years. Martha found me there an hour later, her round face lined with more wrinkles than I remembered, but her blue eyes still kind. "Oh, Miss Eleanor," she said, giving me the real hug I'd been missing. "She would be so glad you're here." "I miss her already." I admitted feeling tears threaten for the first time. With Martha, I didn't need to maintain the composure expected by my family. Martha closed the door carefully before speaking again, her voice lowered. "Your grandmother was worried in her final months. Said things weren't right, but wouldn't explain exactly what." "What do you mean? Was she ill longer than they've said?" Martha twisted her hands anxiously. "Not ill exactly. Confused sometimes. Your father and brother were here a lot toward the end. More than usual. And that was unusual." She nodded. "Years would go by with hardly a visit, then suddenly they were here weekly. Your father brought new medications. Said the doctor prescribed them, but—" She trailed off. "But what, Martha? She wasn't herself after taking them. More forgetful. Easier to persuade." A chill ran through me. Martha, has anything unusual happened with her belongings, her paintings? Some have been moved. The small Monet from the library is gone. Your father said it was donated to the Metropolitan Museum last month, but your grandmother never mentioned such a plan to me. Grandmother donating a beloved painting without telling Martha, who heard every detail of her life, that seemed highly unlikely. And her studio, I pressed. Father said they cleared it out already. Martha's expression darkened. 2 days ago, your brother supervised. They took everything, canvases, paints, her journals, even her unfinished work. The haste was suspicious. Grandmother had only died 4 days ago, and the family had already sanitized her most personal space. Martha, I need to see the studio. Do you still have keys? She hesitated. Your father changed the locks, but... A slight smile crossed her face as she reached into her pocket and produced an old-fashioned key. Your grandmother gave me spares years ago, said there should always be a backup plan. That evening I met Michael at a small restaurant in town, away from the watchful eyes of my family. Over pasta and wine we caught up on a decade of life changes, carefully avoiding the subject of grandmother until our meals were nearly finished. Something's not right about all this, I finally said, keeping my voice low despite the privacy of our corner table. The timing of her death, the rush to clear out her personal spaces, my father and Richard's sudden interest in her during her final months. Michael studied me carefully. I was hoping you'd notice, he said after a moment. I've had concerns myself, but as the newest attorney at the firm handling the estate, I'm in a delicate position. What kind of concerns? He leaned forward. The will I've been asked to work with is dated just 6 weeks ago. It's dramatically different from what your grandmother had previously established. My stomach tightened. Different how? I probably shouldn't be telling you this before the official reading. He hesitated. In the current will, your brother receives Willowbrook and the bulk of the art collection. Your parents get significant financial assets. You receive a modest cash bequest, but none of the art or property. I sat back stunned. That can't be right. Grandmother always said Willowbrook would... I stopped myself, reluctant to sound entitled. Michael nodded as if he understood what I couldn't bring myself to say. The strange thing is the wording. It explicitly states that the estate goes to legitimate heirs who have honored the family legacy. It feels pointed, almost punitive toward you. That doesn't sound like her at all, I whispered. It doesn't, he agreed. And there's something else. Thomas Blackwell didn't just retire, he was abruptly dismissed as your grandmother's attorney 3 months ago. He was quite upset about it. As we walked back to our cars, Michael stopped me with a gentle hand on my arm. Be careful, Eleanor. If you find anything concerning, call me immediately. Don't confront your family alone. That night, after the house had gone quiet, I used Martha's key to slip into the tower studio. The space that had once been vibrant with color and creativity was now eerily bare, easels gone supply cabinets, emptied walls stripped of the sketches and inspirational images grandmother had collected. They had erased her presence so thoroughly, it made my chest ache. But they hadn't been as thorough as they thought. In the window seat, a cushioned alcove where grandmother would often sit to sketch, I noticed a slight unevenness in the wood paneling. Pressing against it revealed a small, hidden compartment, and inside a single brass key with a tag attached, "For Eleanor when the time comes. Look beneath the brushstrokes." I clutched the key tightly, my grandmother's cryptic message from our last conversation suddenly taking on new meaning. Whatever secrets Willowbrook held, I was now determined to uncover them all. The next morning dawned gray and misty, matching my mood, as I slipped the mysterious key into my pocket and headed downstairs. The house was already bustling with activity caterers preparing for the post-funeral reception, distant relatives arriving from out of town, my mother directing it all with military precision. I found my way to the kitchen, where Martha was arranging breakfast pastries on a silver tray. "Did you find what you needed?" she asked quietly, when no one else was within earshot. "Maybe. I'm not sure yet," I replied, accepting the cup of coffee she offered. "Martha, do you know anything about a Monet painting? Grandmother mentioned it in our last conversation." Martha glanced around cautiously before responding. "The water lilies piece from the library. Your grandmother treasured it, said it was special beyond its obvious value. And it's definitely gone now." She nodded. "Your father had it removed about 3 weeks ago. Said it was being donated, but I never saw any paperwork from a museum." Before we could continue, Richard entered the kitchen, his expression souring slightly at finding us in conversation. "There you are, Eleanor. Mother's looking for you. Something about appropriate attire for the viewing tonight." His tone suggested my usual wardrobe wouldn't meet family standards. I forced a neutral expression. "I'll find her shortly." "See that you do, and Martha will need more coffee in the east sitting room." He managed to make the simple request sound like an order. After he left, Martha gave me a meaningful look. "Your grandmother kept most of her important documents in her personal study. Second floor end of the hall. If you're looking for answers, that might be a place to start." I spent the morning navigating the minefield of family interactions, fielding thinly veiled criticisms from my mother about everything from my hairstyle to my career choices. Uncle Warren arrived around noon, his presence a welcome buffer. Unlike my father, Warren had always been kind to me, perhaps because he too had chosen a path outside the family firm. "Eleanor, my dear," he said, embracing me warmly, "you look more like Evelyn every time I see you. She would have been so pleased you're here." When I had a moment alone with him, I cautiously broached the subject of grandmother's will. "Did she ever discuss her estate plans with you?" Warren's expression grew thoughtful. "Not in detail, but she was meticulous about her legacy. Particularly her art collection, she had specific intentions for each piece." He lowered his voice. "Between us, she was concerned about Frank and Richard's sudden interest in her affairs these past months. Said they were asking a lot of questions about her collection and finances." "Do you know if she changed her will recently?" He hesitated. "I know she met with Thomas Blackwell about her estate planning last spring. She seemed satisfied with the arrangements then. If changes came later..." He shrugged, leaving the implication hanging. In the afternoon, I managed to slip away to grandmother's study, a warm, book-lined room that had always been her private domain. Unlike the studio, it hadn't been completely cleared out yet, though several drawers of her desk stood open and empty. I began carefully searching, mindful that someone might interrupt at any moment. In the bookshelf behind her desk, I found a leather-bound inventory of her art collection, meticulously updated over decades. Flipping through, I noticed entries for several paintings had recent notations, relocated per F.W. instructions. F.W. Frank Ward, my father. More concerning was the entry for the Monet water lilies painting, temporarily removed for cleaning and authentication. 9/15. The date was just 2 weeks before grandmother's death, and there was no follow-up entry indicating its return or donation. A sudden noise in this hallway sent me quickly replacing the book and pretending to admire a small landscape painting when my mother entered. "There you are," she said with barely concealed irritation. "The viewing begins in 2 hours. Please make yourself presentable." The closed casket viewing that evening was a somber affair, with family members and close friends filing through to pay respects. I stood with my parents and Richard accepting condolences and making appropriate small talk, all while feeling increasingly like an imposter in my own family. Michael arrived toward the end, stopping briefly before me. "The will reading is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at 3 after the funeral reception," he murmured. "Be prepared for anything." After most guests had departed, I overheard my father and Richard in heated discussion in the library, their voices carrying through the partially open door. "Everything is in place," my father was saying. "The documentation is ironclad." "What about Eleanor?" Richard asked. "She's been asking questions." "She has no standing to challenge anything. The will is explicit about legitimate heirs. Once it's read tomorrow, she'll have no choice but to accept the terms and go back to her little museum job." Their confident tones sent a chill through me. Whatever they had planned, they were certain of its success. That night, I waited until the house was quiet before using grandmother's key. It didn't fit any of the obvious locks in her study or bedroom. On a hunch, I returned to the studio and examined the empty walls more carefully. Behind where her favorite painting had hung a portrait of Willowbrook in spring bloom, I discovered a small wall safe cleverly disguised by the picture hanging system. The key fit perfectly. Inside, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me in grandmother's elegant handwriting, a small journal, and several legal documents. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope first. "My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, I fear my suspicions were correct. Frank and Richard have been pressuring me to change my will and simplify my estate plans. They speak to me as if I'm already senile, and the new medication Frank insists I take leaves me feeling strangely compliant and confused. I've documented their visits and conversations in the enclosed journal. More importantly, I've taken steps to protect what matters most. Remember what I taught you about art restoration? Sometimes the truth lies beneath the surface, hidden under layers added by those with ulterior motives. The Monet holds the key not just because of its value, but because of what it conceals. Use your conservator's eyes, Eleanor. See what others cannot. Trust Michael Reynolds and my old friend Thomas Blackwell. And remember that you are the true guardian of our family's legacy, not those who merely covet its material value. With all my love, Grandmother Evelyn." The journal contained detailed accounts of visits from my father and Richard over the past 6 months, noting their increasing pressure about financial matters and changes to her will. Most disturbing were her records of feeling strangely foggy after taking new medications they had brought supposedly from her doctor. The legal documents included a copy of what appeared to be an earlier will dated 8 months ago, leaving Willowbrook and the bulk of the art collection to me with provisions for a public foundation to be established. There was also a letter from Thomas Blackwell expressing concerns about attempts to change her estate plans while she might be under undue influence. As I carefully returned everything to the safe except the letter addressed to me, one phrase kept repeating in my mind: "The Monet holds the key." But the painting was gone, removed by my father weeks ago. Or was it Martha had said it was supposedly being cleaned and authenticated? As an art conservator myself, I knew what that could entail, and suddenly, grandmother's words about looking beneath the brushstrokes took on new meaning. The next morning, I needed to find out where that painting had gone. And I had less than 24 hours before the will reading that could potentially cut me out of my grandmother's legacy forever. The day of the funeral arrived with appropriately somber skies. I dressed in a simple black dress, my mind racing, with everything I'd discovered, and the questions still unanswered. The Monet painting was key to something important, but what? And more urgently, where was it now? During breakfast, I managed a moment alone with Martha in the pantry. "The painting that was removed from the library. Do you know where it might have been taken?" I asked quietly. Martha glanced toward the door before answering. I overheard Mr. Richard talking on the phone about paintings being stored at Westbrook Fine Art Services downtown. Security purposes, he said. Westbrook was a local art handling company that provided conservation services and secure storage for valuable collections. As a conservator myself, I might be able to gain access, but not until after the funeral. The service itself was tasteful but impersonal, exactly what my parents would have wanted. The family minister spoke of grandmother's philanthropy and community standing, but never once mentioned her passion for art or her warm, sometimes mischievous personality. She was reduced to an appropriate legacy for the Ward family name, nothing more. I sat between Uncle Warren and a distant cousin, acutely aware of the divide between myself and my immediate family. My mother dabbed at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, while my father maintained the stoic expression he reserved for public appearances. Richard played the role of grieving grandson perfectly, his arm protectively around our mother's shoulders. After the burial, guests returned to Willowbrook for the reception. I circulated as expected, accepting condolences and making small talk, all while watching the clock. I needed to get to Westbrook before they closed for the day, but slipping away from the reception without notice would be nearly impossible. Salvation came unexpectedly from Uncle Warren, who cornered me near the library. Your grandmother asked me to give you something, he said quietly, pressing a small envelope into my hand. Not here. Find somewhere private. I nodded, slipping the envelope into my pocket and excusing myself to my room a few minutes later. Inside the envelope was a business card for Thomas Blackwell with a handwritten note. Evelyn asked me to help Eleanor if needed. Call any time. I immediately dialed the number. Mr. Blackwell, this is Eleanor Ward, Evelyn's granddaughter. There was a pause before he responded, his voice cautious. Eleanor, I've been hoping you'd call. I'm so sorry about your grandmother. Thank you. I believe she wanted us to speak about her will and some concerns she had. Indeed. His tone warmed slightly. I was disturbed by my abrupt dismissal as her attorney 3 months ago. After nearly 40 years of service to your family, it seemed unusual. Can you tell me about the will you prepared for her before the new one? He hesitated. I probably shouldn't discuss this over the phone, but I can tell you I witnessed her sign a comprehensive estate plan 8 months ago after weeks of careful consideration. She was absolutely clear about her intentions at that time. And those intentions were different from what my father and Richard are expecting. Significantly, he confirmed. Eleanor, if you have any evidence that your grandmother was being influenced or medicated without proper supervision, I would be very interested in seeing it before the will reading. I might, I said, thinking of the journal in the safe. But right now I need to check something at Westbrook Fine Art Services, a painting that might be important. The Monet, he said immediately. She called me about it just before I was dismissed. Said it contained something crucial. My pulse quickened. Do you know what? No details. Just that if anything happened to her, that painting needed to be examined by you specifically. Your conservation expertise was essential, she said. After hanging up, I changed quickly into more casual clothes and slipped out a side door while the reception continued in full swing. I drove downtown to Westbrook, formulating a plan as I went. The facility was housed in a modern, nondescript building with excellent security card access doors, cameras, and a reception desk manned by a young woman who looked up expectantly as I entered. Can I help you? I summoned my most professional demeanor. I'm Eleanor Ward, art conservator with the Boston MFA. I'm here about the Ward collection, specifically a Monet that was brought in recently for assessment. I produced my museum ID card, hoping it would suffice. She checked her computer. Yes, we have several pieces from the Ward estate. The Monet was logged in 3 weeks ago for technical examination and conservation assessment. That's the one. I've been asked by the estate to provide a second opinion on its condition. Family concerns, I added with a conspiratorial smile. She hesitated. I don't see your name on the authorized access list. That's strange. My brother Richard should have updated it. Would you mind calling him? He's at our grandmother's funeral reception right now, but I'm sure he'd confirm my authorization. I was gambling that she wouldn't want to disturb someone at a funeral. The gamble paid off. Let me check with my supervisor instead, she said, disappearing into a back office. She returned moments later with an older man who introduced himself as David Porter, the conservation director. Recognition flickered in his eyes when I gave my name. Eleanor Ward. From the Boston MFA. I read your paper on infrared reflectography in detecting underlying compositions. Brilliant work. Relief flooded through me. Thank you. I'm actually here about a family matter. My grandmother's Monet was brought in recently. Given my expertise in Impressionist works, I'd like to examine it. Professional courtesy won out over strict protocol. Of course. It's in our imaging lab now. We've just completed X-ray analysis as requested by Richard Ward. He led me to a large, well-equipped laboratory where the familiar Monet water lilies painting rested on an examination table. Beside it were several large printouts of X-ray images. Fascinating piece, David commented. The X-rays revealed another composition underneath which isn't unusual for that period. Artists often reused canvases, but this underlying image is quite detailed, appears to be a document of some kind rather than another painting. My heart raced as I leaned in to examine the X-rays. They're clearly visible beneath the layers of Monet's water lilies was the unmistakable form of a legal document complete with signature lines and a seal. Do you have the capacity to do infrared reflectography here? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. It might reveal the text more clearly. We do, though we haven't run those tests yet. Would you like to see the results? Very much so. And I'd like to check the backing of the painting as well if possible. While David prepared the infrared equipment, I carefully examined the painting's frame and backing. The stretcher appeared newer than would be expected for a painting of that age, perhaps replaced during previous conservation work. Along one edge, I noticed a slight gap in the canvas lining. Carefully using techniques I'd learned during my conservation training, I probed the gap with a micro tool. There was definitely something sandwiched between the original canvas and the backing, something thin, but stiff like paper. The infrared images confirmed my suspicions. Beneath the beautiful Impressionist scene of water lilies was a perfectly preserved legal document, a will dated 1 year ago with grandmother's unmistakable signature and those of 2 witnesses, including Thomas Blackwell. This is unusual, David said, staring at the screen. I've seen artists conceal sketches or other paintings, but never a legal document. My grandmother was nothing if not inventive, I replied, my mind racing. David, I need to document this thoroughly. The will reading is in, I checked my watch, less than 2 hours. You think this hidden document supersedes the current will? I'm certain of it. And I believe that's exactly why my grandmother concealed it. This way she feared someone would destroy it. With David's help, I photographed the infrared images and carefully documented the hidden will without damaging the painting. The document clearly left Willowbrook and the art collection to me with instructions to establish a public foundation in her name. Richard and my parents received more modest bequests with specific language about preserving artistic legacy over financial gain. As I was finishing, my phone rang Michael, sounding anxious. "Eleanor, where are you? The will reading is moved up to 4 o'clock, and your family is looking for you." "I found it, Michael," I said, unable to contain my excitement. "The real will hidden inside the Monet painting. Grandmother concealed it there when she suspected they were going to force her to sign a new one." "That's incredible," he said after a moment. "But will it hold up legally? The will I have is properly signed and witnessed." "So is this one, and it's dated earlier. Plus I have her journal documenting how they manipulated her and a letter explicitly stating her true intentions. She was brilliant, Michael. She created a backup plan they never suspected. Get back here as quickly as you can, and Eleanor, be prepared for their reaction. This won't go down easily." I thanked David for his help, promised to return for proper scientific analysis of the painting, and raced back to Willowbrook, the evidence secure in my bag. Thomas Blackwell had agreed to meet me there, bringing his own records of grandmother's true estate plans. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed several unfamiliar cars had departed, and fewer guests remained. The family was drawing inward for the will reading the moment when they believed their scheme would be complete. They had no idea what was coming. I slipped in through a side entrance, hoping to avoid confrontation until the official will reading began. The main reception areas were nearly empty now, with just a few lingering guests being politely ushered toward the door by my mother's efficient social management. Michael intercepted me in the hallway, his expression a mixture of concern and anticipation. "They're gathering in the library. Your father seems eager to proceed." "Is Thomas Blackwell here yet?" "Just arrived. He's waiting in the east sitting room with Uncle Warren." I quickly filled Michael in on exactly what I'd discovered at Westbrook, showing him the photographs of the infrared images revealing the hidden will. "This is extraordinary," he said, examining them. "Your grandmother was both brilliant and thorough. The question now is how to present this evidence for maximum effect." "I want them to show their hand first," I decided. "Let them think they've won before revealing what we know." Michael nodded. "A sound strategy. But be prepared, they won't surrender easily even with this evidence." We joined Thomas Blackwell and Uncle Warren for a brief strategy session. Thomas, a distinguished man in his 70s with shrewd eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, reviewed the photos with professional interest. "Classic Evelyn," he said with a hint of admiration. "She always did think 3 moves ahead. This document appears identical to the will I prepared for her last year before I was summarily dismissed." "Will it hold up legally?" I asked. "With the supporting evidence you've gathered about her being medicated and pressured?" "Absolutely. The only question is whether they'll fight it in court, which could tie up the estate for years." At precisely 4 o'clock, we entered the library, where my parents Richard and several other family members had assembled. The room fell silent as we walked in, all eyes turning to me with varying degrees of surprise and suspicion. "Eleanor," my father said, with forced pleasantness, "we were beginning to wonder if you'd decided to leave early." "And missed the reading of grandmother's will, I wouldn't dream of it." I took a seat directly across from him, meeting his gaze steadily. My mother's eyes narrowed at the sight of Thomas Blackwell. "Thomas, this is unexpected. The family is using Stevenson and Clark now for legal matters." "I'm here at Eleanor's request," he replied smoothly. "As Evelyn's longtime legal counsel, I have an interest in ensuring her true wishes are honored." The atmosphere in the room tensed perceptibly. Richard shifted in his seat, exchanging a quick glance with our father. Michael cleared his throat and opened his portfolio. "As the attorney currently assigned to the estate, I'll proceed with reading the will dated 6 weeks ago. He began with the formal legal preamble, then moved to specific bequests, jewelry, to various female relatives' books, to Uncle Warren, small financial gifts, to long-standing household staff, including Martha. Then came the major provisions. To my son, Frank Ward, and his wife, Gloria, I leave the sum of $5 million and my property in Florida. My mother smiled tightly, nodding, as if this confirmed her expectations. To my grandson, Richard Ward, I leave Willowbrook Estate in its entirety, along with all art and collectibles contained therein, with the exception of items otherwise specifically bequeathed. Richard didn't bother hiding his satisfied smile. To my granddaughter, Eleanor Ward, I leave the sum of $100,000 with the stipulation that this bequest is made to legitimate heirs who have honored the family legacy and traditions. The deliberate smallness of my bequest, coupled with the pointed language about legitimate heirs, hung in the air. My mother shot me a look that managed to be both triumphant and pitying. This concludes the last will and testament of Evelyn Marie Ward. Michael finished closing the folder. Well, my father said after a moment, I believe that's quite clear. Mother's wishes have been expressed and should be respected by all parties. He glanced pointedly in my direction. I allowed the silence to stretch for several seconds, feeling the weight of their expectation that I would either protest futilely or accept defeat gracefully. I find it interesting, I finally said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, that this will so dramatically contradicts what grandmother told me directly about her intentions for Willowbrook and her collection. Richard sighed theatrically. Eleanor, just because you had some childhood fantasy about inheriting— It wasn't a fantasy, Richard, I interrupted. It was a detailed plan grandmother and I discussed many times, a plan she documented legally. The will was just read, my father said firmly. Whatever discussions you believe you had, I'm referring to her actual will. I continued, nodding to Thomas Blackwell, who removed a document from his briefcase. The one she executed a year ago with Thomas as her attorney and proper witnesses. My father's face hardened. That will was superseded by the one just read. Mother changed her mind, as was her right. Did she? I asked quietly. Or was she manipulated while being improperly medicated? The room went very still. My mother's hand moved to her throat in what might have been genuine shock or practiced indignation. That's a serious accusation, my father said, his attorney's caution surfacing. It is, I agreed, and I have serious evidence to support it. I placed grandmother's journal on the table between us. This is grandmother's record of the last 6 months. It documents how you and Richard visited regularly, pressuring her about financial matters. How you brought new medications that left her feeling confused and compliant. How you isolated her from friends and advisors who might have protected her interests. Richard leaned forward, his face flushing. This is absurd. You're manufacturing evidence because you're disappointed about the inheritance. Am I? I removed the letter grandmother had left me from my bag. This letter, hidden in a place only I would know, to look specifically, warns about your attempts to change her will against her wishes. My father maintained his composure, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. Letters and journals can be fabricated, Eleanor. The witnessed, notarized will Michael just read cannot. You're right about one thing, I conceded. Properly witnessed legal documents are difficult to challenge. Which brings me to this. I placed the photographs of the infrared images on the table. These were taken today at Westbrook Fine Art Services. They show what's hidden beneath the surface of grandmother's Monet water lilies, painting the one you removed from the library 3 weeks ago, presumably, when you realized what it contained. The color drained from my father's face as he stared at the images. That's right, I continued. Grandmother hid her true will inside the painting itself. As a skilled conservator, she knew exactly how to conceal it, between the canvas and backing, where it would be preserved indefinitely unless someone specifically knew to look for it using conservation techniques. This is preposterous, my mother protested, but her voice lacked conviction. The will hidden in the painting is identical to this copy, Thomas Blackwell said, presenting the document from his briefcase. Executed in my office 1 year ago with myself and my legal secretary as witnesses. It leaves Willowbrook and the art collection to Eleanor with instructions to establish a public foundation. The provisions for the rest of the family are more modest, but still generous. More importantly, Michael added, this hidden will, combined with Evelyn's journal documenting her concerns about being manipulated, creates a strong case for undue influence regarding the more recent will. Any court would likely invalidate the later document. Richard stood abruptly. You think you're so clever, don't you? Finding some trick grandmother played, this doesn't prove anything, except that she was becoming mentally unstable in her final years. Richard, my father warned, but it was too late. She was always favoring you, Richard continued, his composure cracking. Poor artistic Eleanor, who needed special treatment and encouragement. Do you have any idea what it takes to actually run this family's affairs, to maintain what generations have built? No, you were too busy playing with paintbrushes, while I was learning to manage real responsibilities. Is that why you helped Dad pressure her into changing her will? I asked calmly. Because you thought you deserved it more. She needed guidance, Richard snapped. She was making irrational decisions about the estate. The collection alone is worth millions. It should remain in the family, not be donated to some public foundation where anyone can access it. That's exactly what she wanted, I replied. Art was never meant to be hoarded, Richard. She believed it should be shared. Enough. My father interrupted, his legal mind clearly calculating the ramifications of Richard's outburst. This situation clearly requires further legal review. Until these competing claims are resolved, nothing should be moved or changed regarding the estate. I agree, Thomas said. Though I should note that as the earlier will appears valid and uncontested in its creation, it would typically be considered the operating document until proven otherwise. The implication was clear. The burden of proof had shifted. They would now have to prove the later will was valid rather than me having to prove it wasn't. My mother, ever practical, switched tactics. Eleanor, surely we can discuss this as a family. There must be a compromise that honors your grandmother's intentions while preserving family harmony. Family harmony, I repeated incredulously. Was that your concern when you excluded me from family events? When you dismissed my career and choices at every turn? When you tried to erase me from grandmother's will? We never tried to erase you, she protested. The bequest was generous. It wasn't about the money, I interrupted. It was about erasing my connection to her legacy, about punishing me for not conforming to your vision of what a ward should be. Uncle Warren, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. I think Evelyn knew exactly what she was doing, both in her original estate plan and in how she protected it. She valued Eleanor's artistic sensibility and integrity. She trusted Eleanor to preserve not just the collection, but its purpose. My father's expression had turned calculating. The family has legal options. Contesting the earlier will could take years to resolve. It could, I acknowledged. And during that time, the estate would be in limbo. The collection couldn't be sold or moved. Willowbrook couldn't be transferred. Is that really what you want? I could see him weighing the costs, financial and reputational, of a protracted legal battle that might expose their manipulation of an elderly woman. The Ward family name meant everything to him. Perhaps, he said carefully, there is room for discussion about an arrangement that acknowledges all parties' interests. It wasn't surrender, but it was the beginning of negotiation. I glanced at Thomas and Michael, who both gave slight nods of encouragement. I'm willing to discuss an arrangement, I said. But grandmother's core wishes must be honored. The collection will become public, and Willowbrook will house it as she intended. As the initial shock subsided, the conversation shifted to practical considerations. Richard remained sullenly silent, but my father engaged with the legal realities Thomas presented. My mother, ever adaptive, began suggesting ways the family might support the foundation while maintaining certain privileges. Throughout the discussion, I kept returning to the image of grandmother in her studio, patiently explaining to a younger me how art conservation wasn't just about preservation, but about revealing truth. Sometimes, Eleanor, she had said, the most valuable thing isn't what's immediately visible, but what lies beneath, waiting for the right person to discover it. In hiding her true will within a painting, she had trusted that I would understand both the clue and its significance. She had seen me clearly even when the rest of my family refused to. As the meeting concluded with an agreement to continue discussions, the following day, Martha appeared at the library door. Miss Eleanor, there's something else you should see. In the studio. I followed her up the winding stairs to the tower room, where she pointed to a section of wall that had been exposed when the family removed grandmother's paintings. I noticed it earlier when I was cleaning, she explained. There, painted directly onto the wall and previously hidden behind her artwork, was a small but exquisite mural Willowbrook in full spring bloom, with a young woman who was clearly me sitting beneath a willow tree, paintbrush in hand. Beside it, in grandmother's distinctive script, to Eleanor who sees beauty others miss, the true legacy continues through you. It was her final message, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to be revealed, just like the truth she had concealed within the Monet. In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead with the family, I had already won the most important battle, preserving grandmother's true legacy and reclaiming my place within it. The days following the confrontation in the library unfolded with a tension that permeated every corner of Willowbrook. My family maintained outward civility, but beneath the surface, strategies were being formulated and alliances tested. I established myself in grandmother's study, working with Thomas Blackwell and Michael to document everything and secure the legal standing of the original will. Richard vacillated between cold fury and calculated attempts at reconciliation. We could still work together on this, Eleanor, he suggested during one forced interaction in the hallway. Keep the foundation within family control. There's no need to bring outsiders into our affairs. The foundation will have a proper board of directors with art world expertise, I replied. That was grandmother's explicit intention. He couldn't hide his frustration. You've always been so stubborn about doing things your way. Just like when you threatened to expose Dad's client all those years ago. You mean when I objected to helping cover up environmental contamination? Yes, I do tend to be stubborn about ethics. My mother took a different approach, attempting to reframe past family dynamics in a more favorable light. We've always been proud of you in our own way, Eleanor, she said over an awkward breakfast. We simply worried about your financial security in such an unstable field. The field that grandmother entrusted with her entire collection, I pointed out. The expertise she valued enough to make central to her legacy planning. Father remained strategic, focusing on negotiating terms that would preserve some control and family prestige while avoiding the public relations disaster of contesting the will. The ward name has certain obligations attached to it, he reminded me repeatedly. Any foundation bearing that name must maintain appropriate standards. I understood the subtext. He wanted veto power over how the collection was presented and managed. It was a concession I wouldn't make. Uncle Warren proved to be an unexpected ally during these tense negotiations. His academic background gave him credibility when discussing the educational potential of making the collection public. A properly managed foundation could become a significant cultural institution, he pointed out during one family discussion. The ward name associated with arts education, rather than just legal prowess, it expands our legacy rather than diminishing it. I watched my father considering this perspective, the idea that the foundation might actually enhance family prestige rather than diminish his control. It was a narrative that might allow him to accept defeat without losing face. Meanwhile, Martha helped me begin cataloging the collection properly, identifying pieces that had been moved or misrepresented in recent months. The small Monet remained at Westbrook for proper conservation assessment, its hidden document now carefully extracted and preserved as legal evidence. Michael and I worked closely during this period, our childhood friendship deepening into something more complex as we navigated the intersection of personal and professional boundaries. His legal expertise was invaluable, but it was his unwavering support that meant the most. "Your grandmother would be so proud of how you're handling this," he told me one evening as we reviewed documentation in the garden gazebo, away from the watchful eyes of family. Standing your ground, without becoming bitter or vindictive, that takes real strength. 1 week after the will revelation, Thomas Blackwell arranged a formal meeting with the family and their legal representatives. The atmosphere in the library was tense but resigned as Thomas presented the terms that would move forward without contest. First grandmother's original will would be honored with Willowbrook, and the art collection passing to me for the establishment of the Evelyn Ward Foundation for the Arts. Second, my parents would receive the financial bequest, and Florida property specified in the original will substantially less than the revised version had promised, but still generous. Third, Richard would be offered a position on the foundation's board, provided he completed specific education in arts administration, a compromise that acknowledged his business acumen while ensuring he couldn't control foundation decisions. Fourth, the family name would be prominently featured in all foundation materials, preserving the Ward legacy in a new form. Finally, and most painfully for my father, there would be no public disclosure of the circumstances surrounding the contested will. The family's manipulation of grandmother would remain private, conditional upon their full cooperation with the foundation's establishment. "These terms are firm," Thomas concluded. "Should you choose to contest them, we are prepared to present all evidence regarding undue influence and potential elder abuse in court." The unspoken threat hung in the air: fight this, and your reputation will be destroyed. After a tense silence, my father nodded curtly. "We'll agree to these terms with proper legal documentation of all parties' rights and responsibilities moving forward." It wasn't a gracious surrender, but it was final. The battle for grandmother's legacy was over. The real work, however, was just beginning. Over the following months, I divided my time between Boston and Willowbrook, working with museum professionals to properly catalog the collection and prepare the estate for its transformation into a public institution. I resigned from the MFA to focus full-time on establishing the foundation, though I maintained my conservation practice for the collection's benefit. Richard initially kept his distance, but curiosity eventually drew him into the project. His organizational skills proved useful in establishing the foundation's administrative structure, and to my surprise, he developed a genuine interest in certain aspects of the collection, particularly the early American landscapes that had financial as well as artistic value. "I never really looked at them before," he admitted during one cataloging session. "I saw dollar signs, not brushstrokes. Grandmother always said the value of art isn't in its price tag, but in how it makes you feel," I replied. He considered this. "I'm beginning to understand what she meant." My parents adapted to the new reality with practiced social grace, speaking proudly of our family foundation at community events as if it had been their idea all along. Mother even began hosting small preview gatherings for local cultural leaders, positioning herself as a patron of the arts. It was revisionist history at its finest, but it facilitated the transition, so I accepted it with minimal correction. Uncle Warren became an enthusiastic contributor to the Foundation's educational programming, developing lecture series that connected the art collection to broader historical contexts. His academic network proved invaluable in establishing the Foundation's scholarly credibility. Martha chose to stay on as the estate's head housekeeper, her institutional knowledge irreplaceable as Willowbrook transformed from private residence to public institution. "Your grandmother always said this place would be filled with curious minds someday," she told me. "I want to see that happen." Michael remained both professional counsel and personal support through it all. Our relationship evolved cautiously, both of us aware of the complications our different roles could create. But by the time the Foundation prepared for its official opening, we had acknowledged that what existed between us was more than friendship or professional collaboration. "I've watched you bring your grandmother's vision to life," he said, as we walked through the newly installed gallery spaces the night before the opening. "It's extraordinary what you've accomplished in just 10 months. "I couldn't have done it without you," I replied honestly. "Yes, you could have," he countered with a smile. "But I'm glad you didn't have to." The official opening of the Evelyn Ward Foundation for the Arts took place on what would have been grandmother's 83rd birthday. The estate had been transformed, the main floor rooms converted to gallery spaces, the tower studio preserved as an educational center, for aspiring conservators, the gardens restored to their full glory. Local press covered the event enthusiastically, highlighting the previously private collection now available to the public. Art world figures traveled from major cities to see the unveiling. My family stood united on the platform during the ribbon-cutting ceremony, our private conflicts invisible beneath polished smiles. Richard surprised me by speaking eloquently about grandmother's artistic vision during his brief remarks. My parents presented a unified front of family pride. If anyone in attendance knew about the contested will or family drama, they gave no indication. The central piece in the main gallery was the small Monet water lilies, painting now properly conserved and displayed, with a discreet plaque explaining its special significance to the collection and to grandmother personally. Only a handful of people knew its secret history as the vessel that had preserved her true intentions. As guests filtered through the galleries, I found myself standing alone before that painting, thinking about everything it represented, not just as a work of art, but as a symbol of grandmother's foresight and determination to protect what mattered most to her. "She knew you were the only one who would understand," came a voice beside me. I turned to find Thomas Blackwell, elegant in his formal attire, gazing thoughtfully at the Monet. "She took quite a risk," I said. "What if I hadn't figured it out?" "Evelyn never doubted you for a moment," he replied. "She told me once that you were the only one in the family who understood that preserving something valuable isn't about locking it away, but about ensuring it continues to live and breathe." I thought about the mural she had painted behind her other works in the studio, her hidden message to me, now preserved as part of the educational center. She was always teaching me, even when I didn't realize it. And now you'll continue that legacy, he said with satisfaction, teaching others to see beneath the surface. 3 years have passed since that opening day. The Evelyn Ward Foundation has established itself as a respected regional arts institution, hosting exhibitions, educational programs, and conservation workshops. Richard eventually completed his arts administration coursework and has become a surprisingly effective board member, his business acumen complementing my artistic focus. My parents have settled into their roles as foundation patrons, finding unexpected satisfaction in the prestige it brings them in cultural circles. My father still occasionally suggests more practical approaches to foundation management, but he no longer expects automatic deference to his opinions. Uncle Warren has published a well-received book about the collection, bringing scholarly attention to some of its previously unrecognized treasures. Martha still runs the household operations with unmatched efficiency, training a new generation of staff as the foundation expands. Michael and I married last spring in the Willowbrook Gardens, with the foundation's first class of conservation students in attendance alongside family and friends. We've established our home in the caretaker's cottage on the estate grounds, maintaining our privacy, while keeping the main house fully accessible to the public. Most importantly, Grandmother's vision has been realized. Her collection educates and inspires visitors daily. Willowbrook buzzes with the energy of school groups, art lovers, and scholars. The legacy she fought to preserve continues to grow and evolve. Sometimes late in the evening after the last visitors have departed, I walk alone through the galleries, remembering the quiet conversations Grandmother and I shared about these same works years ago. In those moments, I can almost hear her voice guiding me, still reminding me that the most valuable inheritances aren't objects or properties, but the wisdom to see what truly matters and the courage to protect it. Have you ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours when others tried to erase your place or discovered a hidden truth that changed everything? Share your story in the comments below. And if this tale of legacy, betrayal, and justice resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need encouragement to stand their ground when others try to write them out of the story. Remember that sometimes the most important endings are the ones we write for ourselves, not the ones others try to impose upon us. Thank you for listening to my journey.